After a long absence from this channel, Gary Black is back because I keep bugging him. Gary, you got to come on the channel. And in the meantime, I found out this. According to Grok, determining the most influential X accounts impacting Tesla stock or the Tesla investing community in 2025 involves considering individuals and entities with significant followings, a history of market-moving commentary, and active engagement with the Tesla ecosystem. Based on current trends, historical influence, and the evolving landscape on X, here are the top 10 people. Number one is Elon Musk. Gary, does that make sense?
Worse, he drives the stock. He says whatever he says, and the stock goes up or down 5%. So
Then
yeah,
number two is the Tesla account itself on X.
makes sense.
And Gary, number three was you.
Hmm. I'm surprised Grok had a favorable thing to say about me, but I'll take it.
Well, sometimes what the old saying is that there's, just spell my name right. So
Exactly.
you have your folks that are ardent supporters, and you have a few folks that think that you don't have a clue.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think it depends on whether I'm positive or negative, and the people who don't think I have a clue is when I'm being bearish. But right now we're bullish because the stock is down. What is it? Still down 30 something, 30% this year, even though it's up 28% in the last week.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when I'm being bearish, people don't like it. But you got to call it the way you see it.
That's right. Well,
The way it works.
and as you and I discussed last time you were on the channel, you come at it with a very different perspective. You are a Wall Streeter, and that does most retail investors are, let's say, more how would you call it, more risk oriented.
Seeking, yeah,
Yeah.
risk oriented.
Yeah, more risk oriented. So speaking of the stock these last few days, let's just hit that for just a minute. What do you think's going on? Why do you think it was because of Elon's last Thursday night show? What do you think? Do you think that's the main thing? What do you think's going on?
So I think it's a couple of things. One, Elon did a great job motivating the troops last Thursday. He showed confidence. He painted a vision. He had a lot of energy. He was calm, and he said, look, hold on to your stock. Things are going to be okay. And, he painted this picture to me of a very compelling future if I work for Tesla. So I think he served his purpose. He calmed the troops down and made them feel really good about working for Tesla. That was my takeaway, having watched the video, I think twice. Second thing I think has changed is people are realizing, and, you can thank Bloomberg for this. They put out credit card data, which we follow, and you can see that despite all the vandalism and the protest and, all the bad press, orders really haven't changed that much in the last 6 months. And I think investors are seeing that, saying, despite all this stuff, we don't really see a change in orders. And look, there's a difference between orders and delivery.
Right.
But orders, according to credit card data, because you don't pay for a Tesla with a credit card, but if you're putting a deposit down, you use a credit card. And so to me, that's a good indicator of whether orders are sinking, stable, or going up. And, what I can see looking at the daily, because Bloomberg shows it's on a daily basis, shows it on a weekly basis, I can see that orders are pretty stable any way I look at it. So that's the second point. I think the Model Y is absolutely gorgeous. It's quiet, it's got more range, it's got better technology. And I think as that ramps up, and that's what the media, and I have these, you don't see this stuff, but I have fights with people in the media. I said, you keep saying it's about the PR, and that's why the deliveries keep going down. That's nothing to do with that. That's to do with the fact there were no Model Ys. The inventories were nothing in fourth quarter. And anytime you have a changeover, you saw it with Model 3 Highland, you're going to have this, this hiccup, if you will, at trying to get stuff out. And there was just no inventory to deliver. And even if there was inventory of old Model Ys, if you were a savvy consumer, you said, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait till I get a new Model Y. So that's why deliveries in the first quarter, the numbers have come from, I think, 460 at the beginning of the year. Now they're 400 for the quarter, and they're going to come down even further. So I think people are starting to realize, that the orders are fine. Okay, so to me, that's kind of like, pretty big deal. And then last night you saw, and this is why I think the stock was up today, the China numbers have been fine. The China numbers, 2 back-to-back weeks that are year-to-date highs. Last night, it was 17.4 thousand for the week. and the week before was 15.3. Those are the two best weeks of the year. So if the brand is tainted or broken, and people say, well, people in China don't watch social media. That's BS. They do. Um, if the brand is broken, then why are the China registrations doing so well? And they're doing well. And somebody put this out. I can't remember who. I think it was Tesla Chan, who I follow. Of the 17.3, 10.6 of them were the new Model Y. So as the Model Y ramps up, you're going to get second quarter deliveries, and we'll be in second quarter in a week. You'll see that start picking up. And I think you'll start seeing the full year estimates, which started the year at, I think, 2.1 million, and now they're 1.9 million. They're going to start moving up. And that's what has driven the stock price down year to date. So I think people are starting to realize that. That's why the stock was up the last 2 days, that, all this bad press is not really affecting orders. And second, as new Model Y ramps up, you'll see estimates go back up. So I think that's why the stock's been doing better.
So I'm going to throw another one out at you, Gary.
Sure.
I've been saying for about 9 months that as the conservative part of the population, which has been a hater of Tesla, they have been on the opposite side of this deal. So they haven't been buying Teslas, and they haven't been buying Tesla stock. But that as folks got more used to Elon on the right side of the equation, started seeing him in actions, and now with all of the PR that's happened over the last 10 days at the White House, et cetera, that a lot of this new money, or this money that we're seeing flowing in, might be conservative investors who are looking at Tesla for the very first time as a potential investment.
Yeah, I can agree with you. I think conservative investors might buy Tesla. It's not as expensive as it used to be. It's trading at about 90 times this year's earnings, which is still nosebleed for a lot of conservative investors. But, relative to its, let's call it 35-40% growth rate long term, that's not too bad. But here's where I struggle. Gallup put out a poll, and I've seen data like this before, but they put a poll out a couple of weeks ago showing who buys EVs. And Republicans, and they show what Republicans think about EVs, not Tesla, but just EV in general. Do they seriously consider buying one? Maybe consider buying one, not going to buy one, hate them. And yes, Democrats, you can see that Democrats are 2.5 times as likely as Republicans to buy an EV. That makes sense, right? Because most Democrats are more green friendly, more, socially responsible, from a climate standpoint. And so what you've done with Elon's, we'll call it political rhetoric and dodge activities, is you've really gotten the liberals worked up, okay? And those people are 2.5 times as likely to buy an EV. But to your point, on the other side, Republicans who are not as likely to buy an EV, and again, I'll tell you about my father in a minute, who's in his 80s, they're much more likely to buy an EV than they've ever been in the past, because they do like Trump and they do like Elon. And so, I was talking to my dad about it. He's always driven these big, 10, 15-year-old Lincolns and Cadillacs. I mean, he likes these big cars. He says, yeah, I'm even thinking about buying an electric vehicle. I said, you? Yeah. And he says, but I don't know how to charge it or anything. I said, it's not that hard. You put a charger in the garage, and, he worries about running out of juice and all the things you read about. But I do think some of the Trump crowd, because Trump, basically did a advertisement for Elon on the White House lawn, I think you're going to see Republicans start to look at EVs for the first time that may not have looked at them in the past. And so I do think that's helpful.
I have had another theory that I've talked about almost the whole time I've been on the channel, that the last 2 times that we've hit all-time highs, the 410 and then the 480 this year, that each one of those times, it's really been about Robotaxi. It's really been a belief when we hit 410 that unsupervised was coming like next week or next month, which it didn't turn out to be true. This time people thought, we're like, okay, Trump's going to clear the way for the Robotaxi. So I feel like that was the really big thing. You and I have had quite a few discussions on X with regard to Robotaxi. Number one, I'm curious. The number one thing we discussed back and forth was what you think ultimately Tesla's market share will be in the US, in Europe, in China. 3 completely different markets, but how do you see that playing out?
I mean, in terms of Robotaxi share?
In terms of the actual ride-hail
Yeah,
part?
yeah. I don't have a clue, Randy. If I did, I'd give you an estimate, but I don't think it's that relevant, right? And my theory on this is, they'll get to 99.99% efficacy, meaning 1 out of 10,000 trips, they have to have a critical disengagement. Compared to Waymo, which is already there, and Baidu in China is already there. Now, I think Tesla will get there. Don't mistake that. But I believe that with NVIDIA having simulated data and lots of compute, you can see other manufacturers who are investing a lot in unsupervised autonomy will also get there. And you got to remember the government. The government's not going to want to throw Elon a bone per se and say we're going to favor Tesla over everybody else. So I think you're going to see, while Tesla may have the lead because it's got a go anywhere unsupervised autonomy product today, I'm not so sure it's going to be the only one there. And so that's why I don't give it as much share. And what I do say about Tesla is they don't have good marketing skills. Yeah, they got Elon who can go out and talk about it, but we've seen in this PR crisis, they're nowhere to be found. It's just not their skill set. They're, a lot of engineers, and they value that, and it's important. But do you need good marketing? The reason Apple was so successful wasn't because they had great engineers. They had great marketing. And when they were competing against Samsung and everybody else, the reason they emerged as the leader is because they put out great ads that convinced people to try the iPhone, and everybody, embraced it. And I think the problem that Tesla has, whether it be just selling EVs or convincing people that they have the best unsupervised autonomy technology, is they're not good at marketing. That's just not their skill set. And Elon has never put any effort into it. So I don't know if when, you've got 6 or 7 or 10 competitors all offering unsupervised autonomy, that's why I don't put much value on it. I don't know what share they're going to have. I need to see a prototype. I need to see the cost. I need to understand the pricing. And, there's nothing right now out there other than we have a car that works. If you look at the FSD tracker, we see that there's a critical disengagement. It's online. I can't remember the guy who puts it out there, but it's pretty good.
Oh.
And it's one critical disengagement per 500 miles. That's not enough. That's 24 times a year when you think about it. If you drive a car 12,000 miles a year, that's not enough for Robotaxi. So I understand why people get excited about it. You get excited about it, other bulls get excited about it. I can't get excited about it because, one, they're not there yet. The efficacy is not there. Two, I believe when they do get there, others will be there as well. And I understand that Waymo, costs $100,000 per vehicle, but Baidu does not. Baidu can build a car that works pretty much anywhere in China. They're now going to Hong Kong. They're going to Taiwan. And they could build a car for $28,000. So I'm just not sure that, Tesla's going to be the only one who gets there. And again, throw in the regulators who are not going to just favor Tesla over everybody else. If you ever read, you're in California, read the Department of Motor Vehicles of California regulations on autonomy, and they will be very explicit. You have to basically have insurance. I think it's like $5 billion or some kind of bond. You have to attest that your product is level 4 or level 5 autonomy. There's all these rules. And when you look at the licenses in California, there's 3 levels of license. There's driverless with a driver, driverless without a driver, and then there's deployment, which is Robotaxi. There are only 3 companies that have been approved for Robotaxi. I think there's only 7 that have been approved for driverless without a driver. And Tesla's not in there. Tesla's never applied. And I think it's because Tesla doesn't want to test that they're level 4 or level 5 yet. I don't know why they haven't at least applied for a license. They're in that first level, which is unsupervised with a driver, which is level 2, right? So you tell me why Tesla has not applied for that yet, and then I think I can give you a better answer to your question. What kind of market share? I'm not saying they won't get there; they will, and they're in the lead because they can do it in a scalable way. They can build a car for $20,000. They can drive itself. But on the other hand, I don't think they have great marketing. They have no marketing. 1, 2. I'm not sure that regulators are going to give them an advantage, give Tesla an advantage over everybody else that is going to be there. One of the 3 that have been approved for autonomous deployment in California is Mercedes. Now, there's all these restrictions, like they can't go above, I think, 60 miles an hour. They can't drive in the rain or the snow. Not that there's snow in California, but I guess there might be. There's a lot of rules, but they're one of the three that have been approved for it. And I know, because you hear them on the conference calls, GM, Ford, Volkswagen, they're all working on unsupervised autonomy. So they're going to get there, even if they have to copy it, NVIDIA's got to copy it. And then, NVIDIA gives them the technology so they can do it, but it's not going to just be Tesla. So.
Yeah. So I guess from a marketing standpoint, which is what I do, from a marketing standpoint, it seems to me that if you're vertical, so your cost is going to be so much lower than anybody else. You've got the infrastructure in place. You've already got the charging stations. You've already got these locations where you can do the cleaning, whatever it happens to be. You've got a specific vehicle that you've designed specifically to do the job, which Tesla has shown themselves to be extremely good at design and pleasing the customer. So the customer experience, in my opinion, is going to be way better in the Cybercab than it's going to be in any of these other vehicles that are out there. And then you've got 6 million vehicles that are ready to go, of which I'm figuring somewhere between 10 and 20% of the people who own the vehicles, like myself, might put them out into use some part of the day, some part of the week, whatever. So when you have that kind of ability to move into the marketplace rapidly with massive amounts of product, which is the least expensive and the best customer experience, I think it's going to be kind of hard for these guys to compete.
But you didn't talk about the regulators.
Well, the regulators, I think this is a given. It is that Elon at this point, and everybody talks about it. If Elon says it's going to be next week, maybe. But if his top lieutenants say that it's a done deal in June, it's probably a done deal in June. And they're not going to
get every state to approve it. They haven't even started applying for deployment licenses yet, even in California, which is their home state, and they're very overfitted. So I have two worries. To your point is they're not at 99.99% efficacy, which is the gold standard that Waymo, yes, it costs $100,000, but that's what the regulator is going to hold up and say, your product's got to work as well as Waymo. And it doesn't yet. Okay, it may. But if you look at, again, the only thing we see is the FSD tracking on the internet, which is one intervention or disengagement per 500 miles. That's 24 times a year versus Waymo that you're disengaging once per year. Okay. So if I'm a regulator, I'm going to say, well, you're not, and second, they're not attesting that they're level 4 or level 5 yet, where Waymo does. So you all, not you, but a lot of goals will say it's all coming in June, but you're not going to just flip a switch and the regulators going to say, okay, you're approved. You're going to have to produce data. You're going to have to attest. You're going to have to insure yourself, because if you hit something or injure somebody, you have to pay. And at this point, we haven't heard anything from Elon about that. It's like everybody's just saying, oh, it's going to happen. Well, why hasn't it happened already, I guess?
So, no, I think what I would say, Gary, is that they're driving the next version, the version 14 or whatever at this point. The vehicles that you see, driving around the Austin plant and who knows where else they might be driving. Those vehicles are driving at that level. You've got all of the practice vehicles that are apparently going up at Fremont in the San Francisco area, where you do have a driver in, but that driver is making sure that they only jump in at the absolute last second if there's something going on. So they're professional at that specific task. I would say that they know exactly. I mean, Elon is, everybody says he plays 4D chess. So whether it comes to regulations, whether it comes to the methodologies, whether it comes to where they are in the process, I don't know if it'll be June. Maybe they put it off to October like they did last year when they had the Robotaxi day. But there's going to be a day when they will be able to attest, and where they will have more data than anybody else by a mile with regard to the efficacy of the car. Whether that data, maybe the day is January 1 of next year. There's going to be a day. And when that day happens, they'll have 7 million vehicles and the ability probably to build 1 million vehicles a year that they can put into service themselves.
But how do you know? How do you know that? You're banking on Elon, who's been predicting that Teslas will drive themselves since 2019.
Oh yeah, no, no.
Look at that.
The flip date, the day you're talking about, the day when they can say
Hmm.
is 100% ready to go, and it now becomes a Robotaxi. I'm just saying, I have a high degree of confidence, and of course this is where the arbitrage is played, right? The
Yeah.
information arbitrage part of what we do as investors. If I think that there's a 70% chance that that's going to happen in June and a 90% chance that'll happen by January, I'm going to play the stock differently than somebody who believes there's a 30% chance that'll happen in June and a 50% chance that'll happen sometime next year. So that would be, and other people think it'll never happen because for whatever reason they think it'll, so they're not going to buy the stock at all, at least based on the robo-taxi opportunity.
So in your mind, using that thesis, your thesis is the stock went up to 480 because investors got convinced that Trump would streamline the process for Tesla getting unsupervised autonomy deployment licenses everywhere. That was your thought process, right?
But I don't think anybody thought that it would be unfair. It would just be fair as opposed to the last administration, which was obviously unfair to Tesla and Trump on so many levels. So by having Trump in the White House, having Elon with the friendship, that they would come up with a fair system that would judge the vehicle. And again, I think you hit it out of the park. I think Tesla has to attest 100%. That's exactly what they have to do. And you have to provide the data. They have the data. Either they have the data or they don't, you know. And the NHTSA should be able to look at the data and go, okay, yeah, you're right. You've hit it out of the park. You can do it.
So if your theory is right, and I'm not saying it's wrong,
Yeah.
but if your theory is right that the stock went up because of this belief that Trump would streamline Tesla's efforts to get to unsupervised autonomy everywhere, why did it drop by half in the last 3 months then, if your theory is right?
So
Because there's no news on that.
So what I think happened, and who am I? Okay, but I have this channel, and so I have to make these decisions, right?
Yeah.
So my belief as to why it dropped was it was way out over its skis. It shouldn't have gone up as much as it did. It was hit by this negative press, in particular the famous salute, the Nazi salute.
Yeah.
Nazi salute was probably the worst part of it. And you also got into a risk-off market with the VIX going all the way up to 22. So you have these three different impacts all hitting from different directions. A little bit of nervousness among the consumer. You're seeing nervousness among the consumer with the consumer confidence and the consumer sentiment index. The NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business, the small business people were also nervous because of the tariffs and whatnot. So I think all of those things that interest rates not coming down as fast as we hoped, all of that impacted. And of course, what does Tesla always do? It always overshoots on the other side too.
Mm-hmm.
So now it went way too low, and now we're starting to see it picking up off the lows.
Yeah, I mean, I would just argue that in those, let's call it 4 months from when Trump got elected through end of March, we didn't see anything that would make your theory, disprove your theory that autonomy was not going to happen. What we did see was deliveries, and this is what I would argue, delivery estimates got killed. And look, this is where the debate is, did they get killed because of the bad press? And, everybody's now worried about buying Tesla because their, car is going to get keyed and, violated. Or was it because they didn't have Model Ys? And I would strongly argue, and I've tried to argue both online and, call reporters one-on-one and say, look, Model 3 is doing just fine. Model Y is down, I think, 23% year over year. Model 3 is actually up year over year. So the brand is not tainted. It may be tainted a little bit. You'd be foolish not to think there's some taint, but it's not permanently tainted.
Right.
And the more important factor that's driven estimates down this year, which is what's driven the stock down, is there's just no Model Ys to deliver. And the smart consumer said, hey, I don't want an old Model Y. I want the new beautiful Model Y that's, quieter, more technology, longer range, yada, yada, yada. I don't want that old Model Y. And so I guess at this point, we might be on the same page, but I was pretty negative coming into first quarter. I've gotten a lot more positive rate lately, but I like the stock today even 280 better than I liked it at 480, because your point, 480, it was traded at 140 times earnings. And, for a 35% grower, that's 4 times growth. Nothing trades at that level of growth except Apple, so.
Except, and here's the other story for today. The other story for today, which is also unproven at this point, but I believe that a big piece of the PE in Tesla is Optimus. So I think that there's a huge number of retail investors and probably some institutional investors that are only in the stock or largely in the stock because of the number one retail or the number one product probably that's ever been introduced in human history in terms of the potential sales, potential profits, potential use cases, et cetera, which is to me is Optimus. So you have not, Cathie Wood hasn't even added Tesla, the Optimus to her Tesla analysis.
It's just a concept, Randy. It's not real. It's an idea. It's like somebody, you said you're talking maybe you're not a good drawer in Pictionary. It's like somebody could draw it and show it and you could see it walking around, but there's no real product yet. So how do you put a value on it? How do you put a financial model that's demand-based, not supply-based, that says, okay, here's the number of Optimus robots that are going to be demanded, or here's the number of robots, personal robots, because Tesla's not going to be the only one, obviously. Here's the number of humanoid robots going to be demanded, and here's what Tesla's share is going to be. Remember, Tesla doesn't know how to market, okay? So you've got, people like Apple and Amazon and, probably Google will be in this market with humanoid robots, but they all know how to market. And they're going to be out there competing with Tesla, who may have the best product out there, but no marketing skills. And so how do you actually put a number, a market share on, even if you say there's, I don't know, 300 million people in the US, so let's say, make it up, 6 billion people in the US who could afford a robot, times the number of robots per capita, times, how do you do that if you don't even know what the product is versus the competitors?
So I am zero interested in the consumer market. I am zero interested. I'm only interested in the industrial market.
Okay, fair point. And how big is that market? Do you know?
Oh, massive.
No, give me a number.
But I was a manufacturer for 29 years. Okay. I had 100 employees. Probably 70 of those, a little over 70 of those were in the plastics manufacturing end of the business. The first time I saw them bring out that bucket of bolts onto the stage that they had slapped together from available parts, I said, "Oh, yeah." I mean, how hard is it to pick up a plastic water bottle and put the plastic water bottle into a trim machine to trim off the excess plastic that's on the top of the bottle? It doesn't take a fantastic robot to do that, but you can't afford, if you're small. I was doing 5 million bottles a year. If you're that size, you can't afford to automate that. Okay. Now, if you're doing 100 million bottles a year, you can afford to automate that process with a fixed machine that pick that up, put it in the trimmer, drop it off into a box, and then the box automatically puts it into regrind, et cetera. But when you're a little guy, you can't, and you need that bot to be flexible. You need any automation's got to be somehow flexible enough to be worth the money. So I had multiple things that I would have loved to automate in my factory that I never could automate because it was going to cost me $100,000. And
you were too small. You didn't have the scale.
Small for it. But the bot comes in, even if it's 100,000, because it's flexible and because I know it's going to work. I don't even have to think about it. I know it's going to be able to do the job. And so then just to put another point on it, my last consulting job was with a t-shirt printing shop. You know how many t-shirt printing shops there are in America?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this t-shirt printing shop, I'm looking around the t-shirt printing shop, I'm going, man, they could eliminate almost everybody in the building.
Look, there's definitely demand for bots. I guess I struggle with, back to my original question, which you didn't answer, is why can't Google introduce a bot? Why can't Amazon? Why can't Apple? Why can't, 10 other firms work on it for the next couple of years and get a bot up and running? Why can't they do the same thing?
Absolutely will and can. What does Elon say that the product is?
What is he what?
What does Elon say the product is? The product, the product is the factory.
Yeah.
It's his ability to manufacture at scale.
Yeah, but that does that have nothing to do with marketing, convincing, people to buy it. But you're saying I don't care about the consumer, I just care about the industrial purchasing manager.
So Elon says, if you make a compelling product at a compelling price, then the word of mouth will take care of it, which he's proven, of course, that that's true so far in this cycle for all of his businesses, quite frankly. And this is going to be the most compelling, I believe it probably will be the most compelling, and because of his manufacturing capacity, his ability, he'll have the lowest cost bot. He will have the ability to make them in numbers that will be so many more than anybody else can make them. He'll be able to make them on multiple continents because he's already in place. So I believe that just those factors alone will give them the vast majority of the market, and probably they'll be able to build as many as they can make.
Well, you just explained to me why you think the supply will be huge. I'm trying to understand the demand side of the equation. So I get your point that there are a million t-shirt, manufacturers out there, and a whole bunch of factories that could replace humans with, robots. But I'm a numbers person. To me, you got to say, okay, there's this many market of industrial bots. This is Tesla's share. This is how much they can charge. Because, I as an investor, I've gotten in trouble over the years looking at the supply side of things and not thinking about the demand side of things. So I need to understand from a demand side and then put numbers on it. And I just haven't been able to get a number that I think is that big.
So I think that Cern Basher right now is probably doing the best job of laying out the cost side of it.
But he's supply driven. He's not looking at demand.
Oh, okay. But I was probably first.
Okay.
But his numbers are as good as mine or better. And also he does it with such beautiful graphs and stuff.
But it still has to be demand focused.
Okay. But what I'm saying is that what he was determining, what he and I were working on first was, what is the value to the manufacturer? Okay. A 4-shift plant with a $25 an hour employee, the Tesla is worth $500,000. I mean, the Optimus is worth $500,000. That's easy to prove. The wages, I mean, I'm figuring that Tesla alone, for the people that they will, one shift, $80,000 per shift in the Tesla factories. That's what they'll save. So when you can save $80,000 a shift with something which is you're going to be able to build for $7,000, that was according to Scott, I'm forgetting his last name, Scott Walter, who's a robotics guy. He looked at the cost of goods, the bill of materials, and said, there's no way this is going to cost more than $7,000 to build at scale. So you got something you're building is for $7,000. I mean, I can't tell you how many products I've developed over the years. It's in the hundreds. You got a product that you can build for $7,000, even 10, even 20, that has a value to your customer of $500,000 if they have 4 shifts. And you've got yourself something that you should be able to sell 3 times from Christmas.
But again, you could argue Google and Amazon and Apple could also do the same thing.
Yeah, but that was my first sentence. They just did their first out. Their first article was just produced on the line. So this is no longer, maybe they'll have a line next year, maybe they'll start producing them in 2 years. They just got their first article. Now they'll be producing tens or hundreds. Those will be tested, put through all kinds of things, but he's believing he'll have 5,000 this year. And then it's a matter of everybody. I can't tell you how many people have said, this is kind of like building an electronics item as opposed to a car.
Yeah,
so talking about 10 multiples, 5,000 to 50,000, 50,000 to 500,000.
He's talking about supply, just to be clear. So I want to understand the demand side, which I have to do more work on, admittedly, before I start, pissing all over your idea. I just think everything I see out there is supply driven. And I'm telling you, having done this for 30 years, when I just rely on the capacity side of things, I always get in trouble because I always overestimate it. And I've done it again and again in my life.
I would definitely encourage you to look at the demand side.
And think of competitors coming in who are really good at marketing and really good at, selling as opposed to Tesla, which is not good at that. I mean, they don't have a clue how to market. They're all engineers.
So here's another way to look at it. So I'm a bicycle water bottle manufacturer, and there's 3 of us in the country. Okay, Specialized Bicycle and one other guy.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm making 5 million of these a year. Specialized making 5 million. The other guy's making 4 million. Those are the 3 guys. Okay, I get a bot. No, I don't get a bot. I get 10 bots. And I dropped my cost of manufacturing in, who knows? I mean, the labor was a lot because these were also printed bottles. So it's not only going to be manufactured, it's also going to be printed. And so I've got a lot of labor going into this product. And all of a sudden I'm replacing that labor with bots. The other guy's out of business if he doesn't get the bots.
Sure.
And everybody's going to get that quickly. They're already getting it. That's why Brett Adcock and these guys, they're already out there talking to the BMWs and the General Motors, because these guys get it, that if General Motors has got 5,000 bots in their factories and Ford doesn't have 5,000 bots in their factory, they're toast.
Why do you think the market, including Kathy Wood, forget Gary Black, has the market not putting much value of bots into the stock price? Is the market stupid?
So this is a big question, but I would suggest that maybe if you got a PE of 100 on a stock that is flat in terms of earnings, there's an awful lot of robot money in there.
Yeah. Maybe.
That would be my theory. And you've also got Elon Musk as the entrepreneur, who I can't find out when he failed. I keep looking.
Yeah, he does not fail. He's sometimes late, but he doesn't fail. But again, I get comfort in the fact that I can look at the EV business alone and I assume a take rate on FSD. I assume FSD sells more Teslas because it's a superior product. So I have a take rate in my 2030 numbers of 25%, meaning everybody who buys a Tesla, 25% of them also buy FSD. And I hold the pricing where it is, which is probably a little dangerous because prices will come down. But if I do that, I can get $17 in earnings in 2030. And then I got to figure out what multiple do I want to put on that. And if I do, 1.5 to 2 times growth, and I assume by 2030, which is 5 years from now, Tesla's only growing at 25% instead of 40%, I get about a $740 valuation without any value for bots in 2030. And you got to say, okay, what is that worth today? And I figure it's worth about $380. So that gives me comfort that just based on the existing businesses, which is EVs, FSD, I have energy, and I have the services business in there, I can get $380. And I'm not, as you know, Randy, I'm not one of these people who moves my price target around based on where the stocks are. I've been at 380 for a while. And when it was at 4 something, it was 380, and now that it was back to 240. It's still 380 because my model really hasn't changed that much. The only thing I would do if I would update my model today, which I haven't done in a couple of weeks, is I would probably bring the numbers for 2025 down because, look, you'd have to be very naive to assume there's no brand impact from Elon's politics, Dodge. There's some. I just don't think it's as severe. I think it's very shallow. I'm in the camp that, it might cost them 5-10% deliveries this year, but it's not going to cost them 30, right? So by 2030, I think there's still a lot of value in the stock.
What do you think? By the way, I think your valuation method is, I actually, in one of my books called When Friday Isn't Payday, I do a very similar valuation method for valuing a small company, a $1 million company. Almost
it's basic theory. It's not that hard.
And yet very few people do it that way. It's amazing how many people don't look 5 years out and bring it back to current value. In small business, it's 3 years out. You can't go 5.
Yeah, I get it. And look, the big debate is how big of a discount rate to use on a company like Tesla. And that's where, when I get into debates, people say, your discount rate's too high. But I can look at my Bloomberg screen and say, the average risk-free rate is about 4. The average premium of equities over bonds is about 6. And the beta of Tesla is high. So if you're going to risk adjust it, which, again, if you ever took a basic finance course, you have to risk adjust. You got to put a higher beta on Tesla than you do on Google or Apple because it's more volatile. So when I do that, I use a discount rate of 14%, which people say you're way too high. It shouldn't be that high. And they're right. If you use 10%, you get a much higher price target. but I have to be true to thyself.
There you go.
And that just means you have to risk adjust based on, what the beta is or some metric of risk. And Tesla is definitely more risky than Google. No
Sure.
question on it.
So let's go back to the product for just a minute.
Yeah.
What do you think happens to the product sales? Forgetting Robotaxi for a minute, what do you
Yeah.
think happens to the product sales if we get unsupervised driver?
If it works.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And look, this is kind of an asymmetric outcome, meaning if it works perfectly, there's not really that much upside because people believe it's going to work, right? But if it doesn't work, meaning it runs into somebody or there's, damages. And again, right now, if you believe the FSD tracker, there's an intervention, once every 500 miles, which is 24 times a year. So if it works, I think you can get, a lot more interest in Teslas. But again, they're not good at marketing. So I don't know how, there's a lot of word of mouth and it's on Twitter, but there needs to be a better marketing effort to get this out there that this car can actually drive itself. And coming out of Austin, what I would look for is, so Austin's a very what we call overfitted market because their headquarters is there. California's an overfitted market. I would want to go back to your question and say, okay, how quickly can they get this out to the rest of the country and get it approved? Again, if Trump steps in and says, look, I'm going to create a federal authority for this and I'm just going to approve it, that's worth 15 to 20% of the stock because you're not going state by state and dealing with all the politics of these elected officials in every single state. But so I think if it works, meaning no incidents, doesn't kill anybody, doesn't crash, maybe you have a couple mishaps that are minor, I think you could see a real nice move upward if Trump steps in as he promised and says, I'm going to help you, Elon, for helping me get elected. I'm going to clear out and get you accelerated in the rest of the country. You can see the stock move 15 or 20% on the basis of quote unquote, what I call generalized unsupervised autonomy, meaning you could drop a Tesla anywhere and it could figure out through its AI where to go without mishap. But I don't know if that's going to happen, because
so then the next one would be, what do you think happens to car sales? The stock is another story, but what do you think happens to car sales when we get to unsupervised in terms of the entrepreneurial class saying, I better get 50 or 100 or even 3 for my small business where I'm going to be renting these out?
I don't think people are going to do that yet, Randy. I don't think until it's at 99.99% efficacy, and it's not. It's at,
No, take it to that point. It gets
that could be 5 years from now. I don't know when it's.
No. I'm not asking. I'm asking complete hypothetical. Whether it's a year from now or 10 years, what happens to sale?
People will buy it, but you're projecting, you're projecting a future that I don't know if it's clear. It's not clear to me as it is to you. There will be other manufacturers who get there at the same time. So one could argue that you could have entrepreneurs buy 3 and they give you summons for, Uber or Lyft or whomever as a driverless option. It's a lot cheaper. And you could really, and then you have to think about, are people going to still buy cars? Because you could have these entrepreneurs with fleets of unsupervised cars or unsupervised autonomous cars that are picking you up. Yeah, and you could have a lot of those. But again, I'm not smart enough to figure out what Tesla's market share is if you've got 10 manufacturers who are all approved for autonomous driving. So that's my challenge. It's not that I'm lazy or anything, because I'm not. I just think you're going so far out in the future that it's not that it's irrelevant, but there's too many outcomes, right? And I see a lot of, the people that have been on your show say, well, if you just take this many days in a week and this many trips per day and this many, miles per trip, and you multiply it times even, 50 cents a mile, and Tesla takes. Yeah, if I do all that, you're right, it's a big number. But that's mental masturbation, Randy. I mean, it's like I could fantasize about, the most beautiful girl in the world. It doesn't mean I'm going to get her. And mental masturbation and analysis is, you're making up numbers to try to get to a value that you like. And I don't do that. I don't do that.
Now, this next question, it may sound like I'm trying to convince you of something.
Yeah.
And I'm not. I'm trying to make the case
Yep.
for a method of analysis by an investor. Okay. So you look at the robots, the Optimus, and if I'm an investor, I'm going to give a percentage chance of that happening at a point in time. Again, I might scale it out for the next 5 years. My percentage keeps going up in terms of when it might happen. And then I'm going to give it some kind of valuation when it does happen, even if I take into consideration all of the other stuff like competition,
Yep.
the price isn't as good as we hope, et cetera. I do the same thing for Robotaxi. I do the same thing for full self-driving, just as a feature for the vehicle, which will increase the sales of vehicle. Then I do the same thing as a Robotaxi, which makes the fleet, the Tesla-owned fleet, massive amounts of money because the Tesla-owned fleet will be completely vertical. Nobody else will be. And then I add to that the Airbnb group. So I have all of these things that I can put dollar potential on them and then give them percentages of likelihood. And then I can take all of that, and that becomes my future valuation for that unknown that we're both talking about. Does that make sense as a methodology for an investor? Maybe it doesn't for a Wall Street investor or somebody that's running other people's money, but does it make sense for the retail investor?
Conceptually, it's fair to look at that, but what you're missing is you have to multiply that times a market share. You can't just assume that Tesla gets 100% share of that. Because
25.
Why is it 25? Tesla doesn't.
Because that's what Elon says he wants.
But everybody is investing in two things in the automotive business. They're investing in EVs and they're investing in unsupervised autonomy. So you got to assume with a partner like NVIDIA, you know, they don't have the fleet, but they do have the compute and they do have data. It's simulated data, but they have two of the three. And when you think about something like Waymo or better, Baidu, because Baidu has 9 million rides under its belt, hasn't had an incident. It's running at 99.99% efficacy, and it's building cars at $28,000 a car, unlike Waymo. Okay, so I just ask you, be reasonable or realistic. That your vision is right, but I think where you're going to be wrong is the competitive intensity is going to be much more intense than you're giving it credit. And when you have competitive intensity, prices come down and you're not going to get anywhere near as much market share. And I throw in, and I know I keep throwing out a word to you and you keep ignoring me, but they don't have any marketing skills. Tesla's not a marketer. I know you just say, well, that doesn't matter. It does matter.
No. Let's
go back to Apple. Apple beat Samsung because it had better marketing than Samsung.
No, let's wrap it up with marketing, because I know you're a marketer. I know you've got a background in that. That's all I've done my entire career is sales and marketing. Well, I've done a lot of other things, but I believe in myself as a sales and marketing guy.
Okay, fair point.
Okay, in the Elon Musk method, I claim that Elon Musk is the best marketer I have ever seen. I claim
individually correct. There's no scale though. He's one guy.
And that he's the best PR guy I've ever seen. He makes the Barnum and Bailey people look like that they're amateurs compared to Elon. So he has those two skill sets, and he has 200 million people following him on X. It may not be as much as you or I would like, because if I was a marketing guy, I would have already been on the Super Bowl for sure. I would have had the Apple commercial, on the Super Bowl. Absolutely would have. But the one I have to say, Gary, that I so agree with you on, PR departments don't cost anything. They're so cheap.
Couple $1 million.
There's no risk.
I run PR. You with two people.
Yeah.
And they make a couple $100,000 each if they're lucky with benefits.
Right.
That's the problem. It's not, look, Elon's a brilliant marketer. He's got great instincts. He's a great visionary, but he's not scalable. He's one guy. And if you want to get the word out to everybody at once, you need a PR department that can say, okay, here's how we're going to communicate to everybody at once so that everybody gets our message out. Think about if they had put together a PR team a year ago or even 2 years ago when I was yelling and screaming about it. This wouldn't be an issue today with, the vandalism and because you get your PR department and say, hey, look, we're doing the following things, and we're not, they would just dispute all the stuff that's in the mainstream media about, Elon's Nazi salute and, the right-wing organization, AfD, he endorsed in Germany and the Dodge actions, they would just blow it out of the water. And, because there's no PR effort to do that, this thing just persisted. It becomes almost self-fulfilling that when you say, okay, people are not buying Teslas, and it's made up, this is mainstream media, because I'm sure there's a couple cases like this. They're not gonna buy Teslas because they're afraid they're gonna get vandalized or keyed. It becomes self-fulfilling because people say, you know what, maybe I should wait, maybe I shouldn't buy a Tesla, and not having a PR department to go out there and, really hit this, in the face and drive it home is hurting Tesla. I used to work for a company called J&J. Remember the Tylenol? You're old enough to remember the Tylenol incident, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, somebody,
I'm still taking off the little,
right, somebody put cyanide in it and poisoned 7 people. And, but they were masterful at the PR, taking all the product off and saying, here's all the things we did to make sure that, you can't mess with our products anymore. And, it survived. And I'm not saying Tesla's not going to survive. So Tesla's definitely going to survive, but they need to do a better job of being very proactive. And the best PR, as you know, is when you're proactively going out there and communicating to people. And then when something like this happens, you can go back to people and say, here's the messaging. We told you about this, 6 months ago. The other thing I'd say about PR is a lot of the stuff that shows up in the press is competitors. And I know this, you've been a business owner.
Yeah.
Competitors who feel they're at a disadvantage to Tesla are going to be the ones spreading the lies out there.
Yeah.
And it's up to PR to dispute it and say, hey, let's do a fact check here that, Teslas are not safe or, whatever bullshit is out there. But nobody does that, right? So, you got to stop the competitors from spreading lies about Tesla. And that's one of the functions of a good PR department. So
yeah, no, I've been doing it since the very first. I owned a bicycle retail store when I first started out. That was my first real company. And I went, bicycles were being stolen left, right, and center. It was during the first oil crisis, and you could not, you couldn't leave your bicycle anywhere without it being stolen. And I was selling a really good lock set. I went over to UCLA. I was in West LA. I went to the UCLA Bruin, and I asked them if they would like an article on bicycles being stolen. And they said, sure, they would.
sure,
And
yeah.
of course, I could put the name of my shop and where people could come and get a product. I mean, PR, to me, that's even in addition to responding to the things that are going on out there, every magazine, every newspaper wants content. And they could have a PR department, maybe they have more than 2 or 3 people, maybe they have 10 people writing content all day long, just really putting it out there. And when they started doing those few videos, I thought, here we go. We're going to get at least video content. That has been the worst thing I have ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, the quality is good. It's, beautiful to look at. But in terms of the messaging in those YouTube videos, I could do a better job.
Because you're a marketer. You know who they hire in their market department? Engineers.
Engineers, yeah.
And look, the best PR is proactive PR. Remember that incident a couple of years ago where the Tesla ran out of control? I guess it was in Texas somewhere.
Yeah.
Remember, and it exploded and a couple of people died. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And that's where they really should have started investigating PR so they could take the lies and say, here's what's really happening. So if you, and the best PR is proactive, meaning you go out with your messaging and you convey it to everybody in the mainstream media, you have a relationship with these people, you build credibility. And then when something like this happens, you call up these people who you already have a good relationship with, say, look, you know me, and this is what's going on here. And you tell people the way it is, and they can at least, if you have a press release, they at least have to respond to it. An editor's not going to say, oh, I'm just going to ignore this because I don't like Elon Musk. You can't do that. And I talked to enough reporters that I know, yeah, they may have biases, but they know they have to present both sides of the story. And the problem is the Tesla team is not showing up. It's like it's the analogy I give you. It's like the kid who comes home crying from school and says to his dad, hey, I didn't make the football team and I'm really upset. And it turns out he never even tried out for it. And quite frankly, Tesla's not fielding a team. So how can you blame the mainstream media when GM or Ford or Volkswagen starts making up BS about you and there's nobody out there correcting it.
I know.
Because I hear this from reporters all the time. They say, well, I reached out to Tesla to try to get their side, but they don't respond.
Right.
It's like, well, then don't blame mainstream media if you have a bad messaging out there.
I hear you. Boy, do I hear you. We're so aligned on that one, Gary. Well, okay, I'm recommending to everybody, first of all, comment below. Tell us what you thought about what we had to say today, and tell me how often I was right and Gary. No, I'm sorry. It's okay. I want you to tell me that Randy, you blew it again. I mean, Gary was right over and over. Anyway, but also,
Randy, you were right. You were right. And look, I need to probably spend more time thinking about the demand side of the humanoid robot. I've kind of not put it on the back burner, but because I can't, but I should do a better job. I can't conceptualize what it's going to look like, what the costs are going to be, what the competitive offerings are going to look like. I can just see what's out there today, but I got to go, 2, 3 years out there and say, okay, if you've got, again, Google, Apple, Amazon, name a couple others that can do a humanoid robot, can Tesla actually build a better one, and can it market it better? If you just stay, to your point, with the industrial sector and don't think about the consumer sector, maybe. But I have to put some numbers on it from a demand side and not from Elon says we're going to build 500, then we're going to build, or what did you say, 50,000, we're going to build 5,000 this year, right?
Right.
And 50,000 and 500,000, that's supply, right? But I need to look at what is the demand from, all the factories that you mentioned that could use a robot and try to figure it out that way, because then it's a worthwhile number.
Right.
So you're right about that. There is some number that I don't know what it is because I haven't done the work.
All right. And listen, the other thing is follow Gary, because he's only number 3 on the internet with regard to the Tesla category. He needs to move up and, push.
Well, I'm not going to displace Elon, that's for sure.
Maybe he could displace Tesla and become.
No, I'm not going to do that either.
Gary,
I have some really good, I don't say competition because that's the wrong word, but there's some great Tesla content providers out there. They're out there every day working their asses off, and I have a lot of respect for them. So
yeah, okay.
all good.
All right, Gary, thank you for coming on again. And to all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.